Good afternoon, everyone. First, thank you so much for coming to my presentation today. My name is Runming Dai. I'm currently a senior in communication design with a minor in sustainability at Massachusetts College of Art and Design. Today, I would like to present my film research essay, New Woman in Shanghai, the Old Shanghai Film Era and My Great-Grandmother. This research is based on interviews with my grandmother back in China. Through the research, I picked up a great amount of untold family history, as well as evidence of great culture shifting in Old Shanghai. So if you go to my first slide. So my great-grandmother, Tianxiu Tang, was a famous film star in China in the 1920s. She entered the film industry as she started to play a role in Mother's Happiness. She eventually got signed into the Great China Lilium Film Studio and played major roles in over 30 films. But however, in the 30s, as the film industry went into the Song era, she had to quit the screen. And if you go to the next slide. So back then, people from different regions spoke very different languages. North of the Yangtze River spoke Northern language family, which eventually became Mandarin, and southeast of the Yangtze River spoke Shanghainese. Further south, there were Hokkien, Cantonese, and lots of small dialects. People from different regions couldn't quite understand each other. Just like in Europe, people who speak Spanish can only understand a little bit of Italian and French, even though they are all in the Romance language family. After Republic of China took the government, especially after the 1919 New Culture movement, the government started to promote a national language. This required people from all different regions to speak the same language. They then decided to use Beijing dialect in the northern language family to be the common language of Republic of China, because Beijing had always been the political center since ancient China. So Mandarin was born. During the Song era in China, actors and actresses were asked to speak Mandarin in the films in order to make people over the country to understand the content. Mandarin were equivalent to bigger market at that time. So because Mandarin was from the North region family, and the Southern people was born before the Republic of China didn't have a chance to learn this language. A lot of the places like Shanghai still remain speaking Shanghainese. My great-grandmother Tianxiu was one of those people. She spoke Shanghainese her whole life. Mandarin to her was just like a foreign language, even though more and more young people started to speak the new national language. As people outside Shanghai couldn't understand Shanghainese, Great China Lilium Film Studio could only let my great-grandmother play secondary roles in some major films. She couldn't keep up with the market, so eventually she chose to retire from the film industry. So next slide. After retiring from the screen, as my grandmother remembered, my great-grandmother always wore shiny bob hairstyle and fashion items, even after quitting the film industry. At that time, Shanghai was the capital city of fashion, just like New York City. In the 1930s, while most of the Chinese women simply just put long hair in a bun at the back of their heads, the it girls started to cut their hair to ear. This hairstyle was known as the bob. The best bob was the one with big curls. Even though my great-grandmother was not a film star anymore, she still carefully put on makeup, ironed her hair, and spent quite a long time choosing clothes every morning. If you go to the next slide. So in the 60s, the Cultural Revolution erupted in China. It was a frustrating time in Chinese history. The government at that time wanted to destroy the four olds, as known as the old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits. My great-grandma's work was their first target to destroy because its association with the capitalism. For example, in her film Kisses Once, 1929, she was wearing fancy clothes, drinking fine wine, and entertaining. This sounds normal right now, but during the Cultural Revolution, this was against the government's idea of common prosperity, meaning everyone should have the same amount of money. So the Red Guards burned everything that showed wealthy and privilege. And of course, my great grandma's stage photos and daily life photos didn't survive, as well as several boxes of fancy dresses. Privileged groups at that time lived under the Red Terror, the terror from Red Guards. They had to be extra alert to prevent involving into any counter-revolution events. The local film studios in Shanghai got replaced by the government-owned studios. In the Cultural Revolution, almost all films that were created before the New China got destroyed, including the film negatives. The pictures we see today are the ones that escaped from that nightmare of film industry. This is the reason why we can only find very limited photos of the Chinese film stars at that time. As my great-grandmother got older, she started to develop like a disease called senile dementia. My grandmother said that she would sit by the window and count birds flying by the tree outside every day. But who knows if she was trying to recall memories back to when she was still like a famous film star. That to her was like a dream from far away. And if you go to the next slide, after watching Kisses Once 1929, played by my great grandmother, I had a complicated feeling on the main character Li Jing. Kisses Once was a reproduced film from De Mayo's Don't Change Your Husband 1919. However, because no one had access to foreign films except the producers at that time, my great grandmother didn't know the relationship between Kisses Once and Don't Change Your Husband. The story demonstrated the woman Li Jing who tried to leave her husband and find true love, but ended up getting played by her lover. As she regretted what she had done, she started to rethink the meaning of following the new Western culture. The film began from Li Jing's happiness and ended with her regression. She was the kind of woman in Shanghai that got stuck in between the traditional Chinese culture and modern Western culture. At that time in Shanghai, a lot of the foreigners started to come in and live by Huangpu River. It was the first time Western culture started to influence Chinese culture. Shanghai was like a culture melting pot, mixed Eastern culture with Western culture. At that time, no one knew if this would be a good or bad idea. In the film, you can find westernized architecture style, furniture design, food, even fashion items, which were considered modern at that time in Shanghai. What's more, there were even handwritten English subtitles under Chinese subtitles in the films. Despite the rare Western style in the film, the female figures impressed me the most in Kisses Once. The idea of new woman was first brought up to the audiences. In the film, modern young lady wear fancy qipao, a traditional silk gown that were popularized by the Chinese socialites and upper class women in Shanghai, just like what I'm wearing today. So I'm wearing qipao today. So they paired the dress with Western high heels and short hair. When Li Jing first showed up in the film, she was wearing fashion pants. This marked an important turning point in the Chinese film history. Since the Republic of China era, women have been wearing dress for a long time. Pants were only for heavy labor, and it was not appropriate for upper class women to wear pants in the public, as it was considered lower class apparel. Tianxiu wearing pants in the film symbolized a calling of liberty. In the Western culture, feminist movement made wearing pants symbolize independence. This movement influenced Chinese people as well. They started to raise awareness on freeing women after the New Culture Movement 1919. Kisses Once makes the first appearance of new women in Chinese film history. I found evidence of Western culture into Chinese culture not only from the outfit that people were wearing in the film, but also from the way how people make decisions. So in Kisses Once, from traditional Chinese perspective, Li Jing is a destroyer of family happiness, but she is also a victim who gets cheated by the wrong man. She struggles between the traditional Chinese culture and the modern Western culture. She can't control her life and her own future. From the outside, Li Jing is a modern young lady chasing after the love she wanted, but she is the pioneer of the liberty spirits in China. But at the same time, from the inside, she is tortured by the traditional moral dilemmas. So in reality, she is not able to get the romantic love she wanted. Instead, she pays a painful price for that. Li Jing's dilemma is exactly what people in Shanghai faced at that time. In the 1920s, people in Shanghai was brought up with like the traditional culture, which tells you to follow what your parents and husband's orders. But that generation grew up with the Western culture in China. So on one hand, people were afraid to abandon the traditional ideas. On the other hand, they wanted to free their minds and try new things. It was a clash of culture, and this made people in Shanghai lose their directions of the true self. Kisses Once made every Chinese, especially young Shanghainese woman who wanted to try new culture, rethink themselves. The film was played in big cities where modern Western culture existed, while farmers don't have access to view the film or know the changing of culture. Li Jing's act and destiny were also what people in big city worried. However, I have to say the director of the film must be anti-modern and anti-Western culture. In the end of the film, it was Li Jing's father, the one who represented the traditional Chinese culture, helping Li Jing go back to a normal life. The director still wanted audiences to value traditional culture as their moral limits. The divorce in Kisses Once was also one of the first in Chinese film history. At that time in China, only men can write women divorce letters. Women never had a chance to leave their men. But in this film, Li Jun was able to file the divorce letter to her husband. Although this act didn't end up well, we had to say that Li Jun had already become the symbol of new woman who was brave enough to follow her mind and chase after her own happiness. Like what Li Jun asked in Kisses Once, what will be my future position? People at that time in Shanghai got lost too. What she asked was not just women's confusion, but also that generation's confusion under the huge clash of culture. It was a puzzle that China needed to solve in the transition of changing from the old society to the modern one. The social and moral values were waiting to be rebuilt. This film is an icon at that time. So if you go to the next slide. In reality, my great grandmother was actually one of the first women who filed divorce letters to their husbands. Her previous husband didn't have a job, and all his living expenses was from my great grandmother. Even worse, he abused her for shooting romantic scenes with other actors. What he did made my great grandmother feel unsafe and stressed. So, influenced by the new culture, she finally decided to end her relationship with him. I don't know if playing in Kisses Once made my great grandmother decide to pursue a real life divorce, but I think this film might have opened a new door for her to see the options of life she could have. If you go to the next slide. My grandmother emphasized several times that my great grandmother Tianxiu loved flowers. There was always fresh lilies by her bed. She never forgot to water the flowers. The lilies represent elegance, bravery, and strength. I think the flower is just like my great grandmother, who was brave, strong, and willing to try new culture. She is indeed the new woman in Shanghai. Through the research, I found an independent and resilient female figure in the waves of time. And yeah, that was my research. Thank you so much.